I didn't know the trajectory where we were going with this, but I knew Amber was a mountaineer. And one of the things I've always realized is a lot of people haven't been out here to Colorado. So I think we're going to have to do something here in Colorado later in the year, even though people don't like to fly into Denver. But that's okay. But Amber is a very dear friend, a beautiful soul, and a high energy that will break the bullshit, get right to the point, and help you get to the goals that you want to get to if you're willing to let her do that. So here is the CEO, the powerhouse, the founder, the woman on a mission, the woman that will probably knock over any vibranium walls, Amber Furman. Amber, the summit is yours.
David, thank you so much. And I would love to come to a live event in Colorado. So I think you should make that happen. When you do, I will be sure to bring you a Packers jersey so you can support a team that wins Super Bowls.
We've already won
Because
three.
1998 was a long time ago, my friend. A
2015.
long time ago. Anyways, 2015, you're right. Okay, so now that a little bit of the heckling is out of the way, here's what I want to say. First of all, I want to start by congratulating you guys. I am always in awe when I step into a room, whether I'm as a speaker or whether I'm there as an attendee, at the level of courage that it takes to show up. And more than anything, the trend that I see is the inability or unwillingness to acknowledge the courage that it takes to show up and be seen. So, first of all, this is a deep topic. It's a topic that's incredibly important to me, that's incredibly close to my heart, as it is for many of you. And I just want to give a minute to celebrate you guys for being here and for allowing yourself to be poured into. So, with that being said, when David reached out to me and asked me if I would be a speaker again, there's zero hesitation every time he reaches out to me. This time, though, it hit a little bit harder because I've shared my story with grief a little bit when it comes to speaking on stages for business purposes. It's the underlying story to a bigger conversation. To have a conversation about the grief itself is something that gets missed often. And I am looking forward to that conversation with you guys. So let me take you way, 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 way back. Um, my first experience with loss, for many of you that have heard my story, knows that it started when I was 7 years old. And similar to what David was talking about earlier, I can remember the moment vividly. And my mom and I will often talk about this because um, she's surprised that I remember so much about my life at that period of time because I was so young. And I truly think that the relationships that I had with my great grandma and with my cousin are so much of the reason that I remember everything in such detail. My great grandma was such an amazing individual. And, I grew up in a very, very small farming community. And so the images of me sitting under a quilt that was always set up with all of the women in the family around the quilt. I was the only grandchild at the time, so I was very self-sufficient. I was able to keep myself entertained, and I would sit underneath this quilt with some of my favorite games, and I didn't need to talk to anybody. I didn't need to, people would often look under there to make sure that I was still there because I was so quiet. I just needed to be around people. I just needed to know I wasn't alone. And I have so many amazing memories of sitting underneath those quilts while the love that you feel pouring into something that's being created is going on above me. With my grandma lived, or my great grandma lived, my cousin. And my cousin's name was Nathan. And he's probably the reason that David and I can talk about sports at the level we can talk about it. Because I can remember we would sit down with this red binder full of his most prized possession. He would take me into his room and he would tell me stories about every single card. And there was everything from baseball to football. There were people from other teams. There was basketball cards. It wasn't a shrine to a particular person, a particular sport, or a particular team. It was about sports in general. And it's where my love really came from. We would organize those cards. We would organize them sometimes alphabetically. We'd sometimes organize them by sport. And with every single interaction, I was learning more about him, more about life, more about everything that I didn't know I was going to need at the time. So imagine how amazing it felt when 7-year-old me was sitting in his room and he handed me this binder and he says, I can't think of anybody else that I would want to have this but you. Now, at 7, I don't know what that means. At 7, all I know is that somebody's giving me a gift and I want it. My cousin committed suicide when I was 7 years old. At the age of 14, my uncle committed suicide. At the age of 18, my dad was killed in a car accident. Okay, let's be real. I call it a car accident. It was not a car accident. In fact, I don't even know if it was an accident at all. My dad was killed on the job. He was a road construction worker. He was laying cement behind a road construction vehicle, a cement truck. And there was a horrific accident that killed 2 people and seriously injured 7 others. It was deemed an accident, so we'll call it that. Between the ages of 7 and 18, when I lost my dad, I went to 10 total funerals. In my world, that's just life, right? I used to say that my dad's death broke me, when in reality, my dad's death was just the final straw. It started a lot earlier than that. And I just didn't realize it. So at the age of 18, when I'm moving off to college, I don't have a great relationship with my mom. I was a daddy's girl. I'm living on my own. I've been out of my house for about a year. He was killed in August of 2001. I'm in my first year of college, and when I should be figuring out who I am and what adulthood looks like, I'm now trying to figure out how to navigate the world without the most important person in it. I wouldn't know for years how my brain was programming that. And one of the things you're going to learn about me is I love facts and science and tangible things. I'm an attorney by trade. I love all the citations. I love all the things that you can touch. When I started becoming a trainer of what we call neurolinguistics programming or NLP, it required me to understand that there were things that I would never be able to explain about the way that my brain was wired. And this is what I really want to talk to you guys about today, because we often try to logic our way through grief because we shouldn't feel a certain way or we should be over it by now. In fact, my business coach has a bib that she likes to hand out to people that says I should have all over myself today, to catch all the shit that we vomit, right? The reality is we judge ourselves based upon this unrealistic standard of what we think grief is supposed to look like, because we we think there's this picture perfect way of stages, right? You've heard about the 7 stages of grief. 7, is it 7? I think, correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you. 5. The 5 stages of grief, the stages of grief, either way. And what that does is it makes us think that grief is a checklist, that there's supposed to be a certain period of time where we get from one point to the next point to the next point. And if we take longer to get to that next point, then there's something wrong with us and we should just be over it by now. There's other things that happen, though, that I want to get a little bit deeper in how your brain is programmed. Because what nobody really prepares you for is that the loss just doesn't hurt emotionally. It changes how you show up in the world. It changes how you relate to people. It changes how you let people in. It changes how much of yourself you're willing to share in business, leadership, and in your community as a whole. For me personally, loss didn't create just sadness, it created a shield. I've often referred to it now that I've worked my way through a majority of it as my anger shield. I didn't realize I was so goddamn mad at the world. And I'm going to get into a little bit of really uncomfortable reality of who I was really mad at. As time went on, people who know me as an incredibly independent woman. I just started dating for the first time about 6 months ago, and it's the first time I've been in a relationship in 9 years because I have never been willing to allow myself to trust. What I didn't realize is the loss of so many people when I was younger had taught me that relationships weren't worth building, that people weren't going to stick around, that nobody was going to be there for me. So I needed to be there for myself. And in fact, we're going to talk about the way that your brain is wired here in just a little bit. We have, you hear the terms limiting beliefs, but we never really talk about where those come from. And the reality is that something happens, an event happens, and your brain decides something because your brain is programmed in patterns. So your brain says, okay, this happened, this event, X happened, and as a result of that, Y happened. So every time X happens, Y is going to happen. And this limiting belief is created. The limiting beliefs, they're really just decisions that we made once and then have decided to believe the rest of our life. What I didn't realize is that I had created this belief that every single time I talk to somebody could be the last time I ever talk to them. 10 people between the ages of 7 and 18. What evidence had the world given me that people were going to stick around? It hadn't. I was the only person I could rely on. Here's what that looked like. It didn't matter when I was an attorney because people call me because they're in handcuffs, and handcuffs is a really, really intense pain. They don't want to know my story. They don't want to know who I am. They don't want to connect with me as a person. They want to get out of jail. I found myself in the most non-emotional profession I could find myself in any way, shape, or form. And then I decided that I had a bigger purpose in life. Then I decided that I had a story to tell about what grief and anxiety and depression and panic looked like in high performing individuals, particularly women in male dominated professions. And I wanted to dig into that. That required me to have a different level of vulnerability. Now, all of a sudden, I have a business that relies on relationships. So I would go to lunch with somebody and I would start talking to them and I would say, yeah, sure, I'll follow up with you. Let's grab another coffee. And I would get in my car and I would say, I'm never going to see that person ever again in my life. I've recently started sharing this part of my journey because if there's any part of you that's felt any amount of this, where you walk away from a meeting and you say, when they told me to call them, they didn't really mean it. When they say, I'll call you, let's put something on the calendar, they're just being nice. They don't really mean it. We have this term in NLP called perceptionist projection. And what that really means is that when we see those things in someone else, it's because it's how we feel about ourselves and we expect other people to show up the same way. So I believed that every single conversation I had with somebody was going to be the last time I saw them, whether it was business. I didn't even have my family's phone numbers in my phone. If they weren't my immediate family, I connected with them on Facebook or over email. Why do I need phone numbers for people I'm never going to talk to again? I didn't realize until I was on the other side of this journey. Well, that's bullshit. I didn't realize until I was farther along this journey because I don't know that we're ever on the other side of it. It is a constant work in progress. How much my decision making had been made based on a belief that I was never going to see people again, that they were just going to leave and disappear. When you're building a business that revolves around relationships, how far do you think you get? Right? In order to be successful, which was my whole goal in life, I had to deal with this. And I thought it was going to look like something entirely different. What people often don't talk about enough is when we lose somebody, anybody, we miss that person. Absolutely, we do. But almost more than that, we miss the person that we were or the person we were becoming when we were around that person. Who are we? What's our identity without that person in our life? And that's the part we don't talk about enough, because the person that I was when my dad was around, the person I was when my cousin was around, the person I was when my uncle was around, those are the three traumatic deaths. The rest were illness, were old age, were justifiable, I guess is the only way I can put it. These three left. And when I look back at who I am, the identity and the person I was when they were here is the same person I am now that they're gone. I just get to acknowledge that they're with me in a different way. So, in order for us to move on, that's not a fair word, in order for us to become who we want to be in this new reality of ourselves, we get to acknowledge that there's a version of ourselves that we are grieving, along with the version or the person that is no longer with us. And if you're not doing that part, you're really doing yourself a disservice. I mentioned that loss created this armor shield for me, and here's what it sounded like. Deep down, what it really was if I get attached, I'll get hurt. If I rely on people, I'll be disappointed. If I keep my guard up, it'll be safer for me. But what it looked like was, I know I told this guy that I would call them to talk to them about this upcoming workshop I have, but they don't really want to hear from me. What it looked like was, they're coming into town. They posted on Facebook that they were going to be in Vegas this year. If they wanted to see me, they'd reach out to me. And then they leave and get home. And they're like, Amber, I really wanted to connect with you. I just didn't want to bother you. You will find more often than not that the people that you avoid reaching out to out of our own internal bullshit really have a desire to connect with us, but they're dealing with their own internal bullshit, whether it's grief or whether it's something else. And sometimes we get to be the person that shows up in a place of courage and puts ourselves at a willingness for connection, knowing that we will get hurt at some point in time. And also knowing that we'll be okay. These rules that we build for ourselves about what life is supposed to look like and how to keep ourselves safe, they're not conscious decisions. They're survival responses. And, it's interesting because there's a phrase in NLP that we use that your brain is wired for success. And I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that your brain is wired to achieve success if you choose it to. Your brain is wired for safety. And safety doesn't always equal success. Because safety looks like, let me protect myself, the unconscious protection patterns that we believe are in our best interests. I do these emotion work sessions once a year as a client because I practice what I preach and I won't ask my clients to do anything I don't do. And in these emotion work sessions, they are brutal. They're 12 to 14 hours. We call them an intervention or a breakthrough. We deal with anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt all in one day. It is massively amazing and exhausting and beautiful. And one of the things that I learned during one of my breakthroughs about 3 years ago was that my brain had stored, so everybody's brain stores things differently. So my brain had stored wanting somebody and needing somebody as the exact same. And I would be damned if I was ever going to need anybody, because that's weakness. You need people, you get hurt, you get let down, and fuck that shit. When I realized that my brain had stored wanting somebody the same as needing somebody, I was able to see the pattern of what it would look like when I would have a friend pop in my head. And I would say, you know what, I really want to do lunch with that person. And then I would feel this uncomfortableness in my body that I could never explain. And I would never call that friend. And what I realized was happening up here in my brain and all throughout my neurology was that wanting somebody was triggering, needing somebody was triggering weakness, which was triggering my armor. So the moment I would think, I really want to have lunch with my friend, I would think, screw that. I'm just going to get hurt. They don't want to talk to me. They're going to think I'm weak. I'm going to be bothering them. If they want me, they'll call me. This is what grief looked like to me for 20 years. It wasn't until I started having panic attacks and anxiety attacks, realizing that there wasn't a level of professional success, the law degree, the respect in my industry, the six-figure income, the pride that came along with doing something that nothing else in my family, nobody else in my family had ever done, that there was not a level of success that was going to make this better, that I started being willing to actually find resources. Because my mind was really, really good at convincing me, and I promise you yours is too. Hey, Doug, I just saw you. My mind was incredibly good at convincing myself that being guarded was smart, that not needing people and not wanting people was strength, and that staying in control was protecting me. Here's the problem though. That version affects how I would show up, how I would function in the world, how I would handle or not handle the things that needed to be handled in my life, and how I would fall apart privately, but look okay publicly. I would never let myself get too close. I would never let myself say what I actually thought. I would never let myself be happy. This is what self-protection looks like. The reality is that grief deserves space to be honest. It deserves a conversation like this, a room like this, for you guys to realize, for us all to realize that there's not a path to healing. There is multiple paths, and whatever path you take is exactly where you're supposed to be. The only thing that we get to avoid is letting fear run our decisions. If you guys know me, you know that I love country music. I love music in general. Sorry for all the country haters out there. And there is an artist, if you're familiar, by the name of Walker Hayes. Incredible human being, incredible individual. He has a song called Be Careful What You Don't Wish For. And the song itself is written from a dreamer's perspective. We're all told, be careful what you wish for, be careful what you wish for. And he writes the song, be careful what you don't wish for, right? But in that song, he has a line that knocked me on my ass and still gives me goosebumps. And it says, danger's real, but fear's a choice. And I want you guys to sit in that for a minute. Because when you put yourself out into the world, professionally, personally, in any relationship that requires you to allow another person to see the beautiful human being that you are, there's no other way to describe it but dangerous. You're going to get your ass kicked. I think it's Brene Brown, if you guys are familiar. She was talking about giving a presentation and having somebody come up and talk to her afterwards. And she said, this guy came up and talked and says, I heard you when you said that if I show up with courage, I might get hurt. And she says, if you heard me say you might get hurt, then you didn't hear me, because you will get hurt. This is not a might conversation. Right. So the willingness to show up knowing that pain is real, that loss is real, that disappointment is real, the willingness to show up knowing that there is a reality that someone, yourself or somebody else, is going to let you down, requires courage. Danger's real and fear's a choice. You get to decide how you show up. And it starts with this trust in yourself, the trust of knowing that if any single person lets me down in any way, I have enough faith in myself to know that I've made it through everything that God's thrown at me so far, and that I'll be able to make it through that. It really starts oftentimes when we get disappointed because of somebody else's actions or somebody else's disappearance. The reality is we're upset because we don't feel like we can handle it on our own. And I'm here to tell you, you don't have to. Sometimes handling it on your own means showing up in a call like this. Sometimes handling it on your own means picking up a phone call and making the choice to bring somebody in to allow them to support you. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, because if anybody ever said, hey, why don't you call a friend? Who here If you've got your camera on, raise your hand if a friend has ever reached out to you and said, hey, I really need a friend right now. And you're like, not today, bro. I'm sorry. Try tomorrow. Right? It doesn't work that way. Somebody calls us and says, dude, I need a friend. And you're like, what do you need from me? So then why is it when we're on the other side of that, that we're like, no, no, it's a trap. They're not going to be there. Right? We get to allow ourselves to be supported because we deserve it. And whatever it is, for me, it was armor. For me, it was the grief. For me, it was the screw hurting again. I'm never going to feel that way again. I went to bed one night. My dad was no longer I went to bed one night. My dad was alive. I woke up the next morning. He was dead. Like, I'm never going through that again. I'm never going to feel that way again. So instead, I'll just hurt for the rest of my life because I never connect with another human being. That seems like a fantastic alternative. Right? We get to acknowledge the way that our safety and protection is actually allowing us to show up. Because here's the reality: wherever you're at, whatever you're feeling is really allowed. So I've never shared this. That's not true. I shared it publicly yesterday on a podcast I recorded, but it hasn't been released yet. So I guess it's kind of true that I've never shared this publicly. I was pissed when my dad died. I was pissed. I wasn't pissed at the person that drove the truck that killed him. In fact, I forgave him first. I had so much empathy for him. I saw the way it wrecked his life. Sure, I was angry with the company that decided to run a construction site with 37 OSHA violations. I was a little upset with them. I was certainly pissed when they came through the funeral line to talk to my mom about insurance because they couldn't get back on the road until she signed her paperwork. But it wasn't even them I was mad at. 2 years ago, there was an incident that I was involved in that involved hiding behind a rock, bullets ricocheting in a place that I was supposed to feel safe. I don't share a lot of the details about that because it's not mine to share, and it involves a lot of people really close to me that I choose to remain close to. The reality is I was in a place that I should have felt safe, and that safety was taken away from me. And in learning how to handle that, I had this serious conversation about anger. And it was the first time that I verbally said to another person in private, the person I was pissed at for leaving was my dad. And she said, Amber, he didn't choose to go. And I said, my brain doesn't know that. My brain stored it that I wasn't worth sticking around. So every single time I would get in relationships, like, why would somebody love me if the person who was supposed to love me the most didn't love me to find a way to stay? Because my dad had choices. He didn't have to go to work. He didn't have to be there. In my brain, there were these things, right? And I shared this. I want to say, first of all, that like the reason I'm sharing this is because I need you to know that however you are justifying your anger and your grief, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. When I told my friend, my cousin, my family member this, and their response was, Amber, that doesn't make any sense. I know that it doesn't make any sense. Stop trying to make sense of emotional things. Just because you don't think you should feel a certain way doesn't mean you don't feel that way. And if you continue to try to should yourself out of the grief process, you're going to continue to extend the grief process. Because showing up takes courage. It takes the courage to be misunderstood. It takes the courage to be disappointed. It takes the courage to be let down. It takes the courage to have to set boundaries. It takes the courage to possibly let somebody else down. And the biggest mistake we make, and I'll leave you with this because I know that I'm running out of time. The biggest mistake that we make is we wait to feel ready to change. So I want you now to make a commitment that no matter how afraid you feel, no matter how emotional you feel, no matter how unworthy you feel, that you will choose to act different. Because feeling ready doesn't happen because you wait for it. Feeling ready happens because you choose to act like you're ready before you feel like you're ready. So, whether that is making the sales call, whether it's calling the person that you're estranged from and saying, dude, this hatchet's been on my back a long time, can we bury it? Whether it's going out on a date for the first time, whether it's jumping into a room like this. Strength is not pretending that you're not afraid. Your story's not finished. And it's not finished because you're perfect. And it's not finished because you're ready. It's not finished because you're human. And you get to start acting like it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Amber. And thank you, as always, for being a part of the climb and being a part of the summit. And also for sharing a part of your story that I've never heard. Um, I love the realness and the vulnerability behind it.